I want to spend a little time with you today talking about how I think about grades and how my thinking has changed recently. I mentioned in Module 1 that back in the spring when we all went online, I changed my classes to pass fail grading, and I really expected students to just turn in minimal work in order to get the credit. And actually, that would have been just fine because it was a really difficult time and we were all just trying to stay afloat. But what I was actually surprised about is that that's not how most students did things. In fact, most of my students stayed really on top of their work. They turned in really high quality work. If students were struggling, they reached out to me for help. All the things that I want students to do, and I thought were the results of grading, right? So it made me have some new questions about grades that I hadn't had before. And I spent the summer going back into the research and trying to figure out what have people figured out about grading and how does grading actually affect student performance in a classroom. And so I want to spend a little time today talking with you about some of the things I discovered and how that impacted how I'm approaching this course. So one of the first things I want to talk about is traditional grading. So this is the kind of grading that you're totally used to. It's probably what you've experienced most of your educational career. You turn in an assignment, you get back a score. It might be a letter grade or it might be a number grade, but it is supposed to capture kind of all the dimensions of what happened in your assignment and give you some sense of how you did relative to others. This approach to grading has actually been around for a while and is pretty common in K through 12 and what we expect at the college level. It's the basis for how we calculate GPAs. But looking at the research was really interesting because researchers have raised a number of problems with this kind of approach to grading. And I'm not going to get into all of them, but I want to highlight a couple that I think are most relevant to the way I'm shifting this class. The first is that grades help us focus on the end product. So we don't get a grade for all the effort we put into something. We get a grade for what that final product that we turned in looks like. And you've experienced this. Maybe sometimes you've worked really hard on something and you didn't get a very high grade and you thought, oh, like what was the point, right? Or sometimes the opposite. People put very little time into an assignment and turn something in and get an A. And then, ta-da, like that was enough. I will say from my perspective as a professor, this focus on the product is a problem because most students don't really take the time to draft assignments and revise them and then turn them in. I mean, after all, why would you, right? I often hear from students who are starting just a couple days before an assignment is due and then turning in essentially a solid draft rather than a real final product that they would turn in if they had spent more time on it. So I think grading actually focuses us on working this way because it only evaluates that final product. The second thing that the research shows is that grading actually discourages growth. Now, this is contrary to what a lot of professors think, and frankly, what I have thought in the past. A lot of us think that if we grade you really hard at the front end, and your grades are not super high, that'll motivate you to work harder to try to achieve that next level. Unfortunately, this is not what happens. Grades are actually discourage growth. If you get a high grade, then you don't have any incentive to move to the next level, right? You already know what you're supposed to do, so you keep doing that thing. If you get a low grade, it's really demoralizing. And like, why would you keep working harder? You feel like you can't really do the work. And so the research here is very clear that grades don't push us to keep going and to learn more. Additionally, grades tend to be a measure of how well students actually follow the rules. This one hits really hard for me because I think I'm really guilty of this. I put together assignments that tell you exactly what I want. I will tell you how to organize an assignment, what should be included in each section. I'll teach you little things like how to cite properly and all of those kinds of things. And then if you turn in an assignment that does exactly what I have lined out I want you to do, then you score high. And if you don't do those things, then you score low. But that's not really a measurement of how well you're learning or how much you're growing. That's really a measurement of how well you have followed the rules I set out for you. And you know what? I'm actually not that, like, following the rules is not a super important thing to me. So it seems like a strange way for me to approach grading. And finally, and this is related to that whole rule following thing, grades place a lot of power in the hands of the professor. I design the assignment, I decide how much each thing is worth, like how many points. I decide what looks good and what doesn't. I really get to set the terms for grading. And there's not a whole lot you can do with it. There are a few options for appeals processes, but most students won't pursue them if they disagree. And also, frankly, it's not that easy to be successful at that kind of system. So it really disadvantages you as a student. And to me, this seems a bit counterintuitive, especially because, part of college is helping people in college move to more independent thinking and more independent work. And so if that's the case, keeping you under my power is contrary to helping you make that transition. So I'm going to try to do things a little differently this semester. I'm going to spend a lot more time in the next section of your module explaining how exactly this is going to work. But the short version is that for most of the work in this class, I am grading things just based on whether you completed them or not. So if you do the work, you get the grade, and it's full credit, right? And here's why. First, I want you to focus on the process, not the product. I want you to start working with drafts. I want you to get feedback and give feedback and revise and then produce things as a final product, right? And I want to reward you for engaging in that process. And so, you'll earn points along the way for engaging in things like revision. I really think growth matters. No matter where you start, I want you to move forward. And we have a range of students in this class. We have a range of starting points. So wherever you are, I want you to move forward from there. And so, again, by having you just do assignments and activities and get rewarded just for doing them, I've structured the assignments so that they will encourage you to keep moving to the next level and will support you in doing so. And I'm going to give you credit for engaging in those activities. So my hope is that your thinking and your skills develop through this course rather than you just show me whatever skills you came in with. I also want to recognize that being creative and taking risks and making mistakes or errors are a part of learning. When we focus on final products and grades, turning in something that is incorrect lowers your grade. So that keeps you from taking risks. You don't want to risk doing things that are going to decrease your grade. And why would you think outside the box, right? But I actually want you to be able to take risks and make mistakes and try new things and think about things in different ways, even ways that I didn't plan for. I want those things to be a part of learning. And so that's why you get credit for doing things and not so much for is it perfect. In fact, we're just going to dispense with the idea of perfect in this class. And the last thing is that I want to move toward a more collaborative relationship between you and I in figuring out your grade at the end of the semester. And so, I can't take the power totally out of the relationship. I still design the course. I put the syllabus together. I decide what's in the modules. There is just some power in being able to set an agenda in that way. But you have a say. So there are lots of places in this class where you're going to be able to make choices. You'll be able to make choices about how quickly you move through the course. At different points, you'll be able to make choices about uh, articles that you read or videos that you watch. There will also be times where you get to decide if you want to do things as an individual or in a small group. So all of those choices matter. There will also be a point at the end of the semester where I will ask you to tell me what you think you've earned in this class and what you think you've learned in this class. And I'm going to take that feedback seriously. That will be a part of figuring out your final grade. Now, I'll explain the mechanics of that later because that's all going to come at the end. But what I want you to understand is that you have a say here and your voice matters. And the other part is I'm experimenting with things. You know, I want you to be creative. I'm experimenting with this whole process. There may be parts of it that don't go that well. I'm going to ask you for feedback sometimes, and I'll need that information so that I can make adjustments in the course, especially around things that are not working well. So we're going to try to be more partners in this process rather than me having all of the control.